Right, so I guess we will start, Jakub. So good morning, everyone, once again. Good morning, Jakub. How are you?
Good morning, Christoph. All good here. How are you?
Good to see you. All good here as well. It looks like when I look through the window, it looks like the summer has finally arrived again. So the sun is shining, so the weather is good, at least where I am in Southwest Poland. So good morning, everyone, once again. Welcome to it is the fourth webinar today. It's Tuesday, the 31st of May, and we are continuing our strategic portfolio management webinar series. As usual, today's session will last approximately 25 minutes. We will try to leave the 5 last minutes for the potential questions we'll get from you. Hopefully there will be some questions. You're free to ask your questions throughout the session. And without further ado, I guess we will start. So short round of introductions. You already met Jakub, co-founder and CEO at Quistorp, strategic portfolio management technology and consulting house. My name is Christoph. I'm the other co-founder at Quistorp, looking into our strategy and development in various markets and industry sectors. And I guess without further ado, let's kick off with the garbage in, garbage out. So this is the topic for today. I guess it's a very interesting aspect, especially in the context of SPM. At least this is what we hear many times when we work and talk with our clients. They usually are concerned about the data quality, whether they are able to trust the data in the output, or I mean the results, considering the various different systems, various different stages that SPM sort of like covers, and so on and so forth. Many times we also hear that it might be an excuse for them not to even bother about SPM, the garbage in, garbage out. So this is all we will try to cover together with Jakub. On our agenda, we will elaborate a little bit more on the Giga examples. Then Jakub will try to sort of answer the question whether you can really predict the future. I mean, whether this kind of crystal balling effect is at all possible, and how to avoid and minimize the Giga effect in the context of SPM. So I guess without further ado, let's kick off. I will now share my screen. Just give me a second. All right. Hopefully you can see my presentation now. Jakub, if you could just confirm that, please.
Yeah, I can see the screen.
All right. So this is the topic for today. As usual, let's kick off with a short introduction to SPM. This will be very quick, as you already know, because we'll have some people that are joining us from the first series. SPM is a process. It's a process that's really starts with an idea. Usually everything starts with an idea, and it's taken all the way up to the moment when you have an asset in place, whether it's a new service, new product, and like operational excellence finally executed, whatever the project or the initiative is about. This is where it ends. And as you can see, with all the stages, decision gates, you have many different points where you will be, or moments where you will be gathering the data. You will be sort of elaborating on the data you've gathered. You will be getting the data from various different systems. So it is especially important to take this Giga effect into account when sort of thinking about standardizing your SPM process. And probably we will now, Jakub, start with a question of some possible Giga examples. If you could start elaborating on those in the context of SPM, that would be great for us to start.
Thanks, KJ. Yeah, I think if you just may change the slide. So garbage in, garbage out is all about basically being unsure about the quality of inputs and therefore quality of outputs. So the whole Giga or garbage in, garbage out thing is about forecasting and economic modeling. So a very important part of the decision-making process in context of SPM. So basically, we are talking about economic modeling here mostly, and garbage in, garbage out argument is quite popular, and in many organizations it is raised that we can do that, we can do economic model, we can't forecast because garbage in, garbage out, because we are struggling with the quality of inputs, we are struggling with our assumptions, with our models, and the reasons for that they may vary. Some of those reasons are justified, some are more of a cultural or competence kind of things which can be managed and solved, and some of the reasons which may actually be related to this problem, to this issue, are like follows. So the projects on very early stage might be very difficult to plan, to forecast the benefit side, to create economic models. So if a project is in a very early stage, it may be actually objectively difficult to come up with the assumptions. For some projects, for some greenfield projects, so for some R&T projects, research and technology projects, there might be actually no inputs available. So no benchmark, no reference, no historical track record to refer to. And in those cases, you might have problems with economic modeling. But in other cases, the GIGO problem comes from lack of proper competence in the team. So basically lack of ability to create models, lack of know-how, and lack of practice and process behind. Or in some cases, which is like more of a organizational issue, is that organizations try to avoid accountability. So they think that if they create an economic model, they will be then accountable for that, and they don't want to do that because they don't want to be accountable, basically. So those are the main things and main examples. And of course, to some extent, they might be objective. They might be something which is like specific to an organization, specific to a certain business model or certain market. But some of them are purely related to competence, to organizations, to things you may manage and you may actually try to mitigate or remove.
All right. So what you've just said is that because of the uncertainty in the markets, especially what we observe today, many organizations tend to think that because it is hard to predict, it is hard to model, you are already sure that the data quality on the input side will be low or is low. I mean, that's your assumption. So the quality of the data on the output side will be low as well. So that's why this is this kind of excuse, as I said in the beginning, of not to even bothering about this process. But is it really in the context of SPM? I mean, should really people think that you somehow magically need to come up with this crystal ball idea? So whenever you're about to start a new initiative, you take your crystal ball, you ask your question, whether it's what doing it, what proceeding, what investing, resources, money, and so on and so forth. And then you're 100% sure, or you get the answer yes or no, and then you follow up. But is it really about that you should strive to this to the stage that you are almost 100% sure about your modeling? So you sort of like almost invented this crystal ball, yeah, in the context of GIGO.
I mean, of course, you need to put this context of different project types, which we have discussed during previous webinars. So there are big differences when it comes to modeling economic benefits over the life cycle when we compare, for example, operational excellence type of projects or cost down activity. So imagine that we have an existing I don't know, production line, for example, and we are investing in more energy efficient production process. And we know for 3 decades that we are producing this amount and we can expect those volumes, and therefore reducing the cost is relatively easy to estimate, relatively easy to forecast. While on the other side, you have those completely new products introduced to the markets or entering completely new areas of business where forecasting is much more volatile, much more uncertain and difficult. But the key concept here is that, first of all, nobody owns a crystal ball. So what it means is that this whole process is not about trying to be precise in guessing the future. It's not about guessing the future, basically. It's not about guessing the future. It's about trying to understand the economic profile, what may happen, what are the scenarios, where we can land with that, at what level we are able to achieve profitability, where is our break even, what is our uncertainty. So the philosophy behind is usually quite different than people think, because let's say the obvious thinking is that by forecasting, by creating an economic model, we are creating a plan which we should be accountable for, like in case of yearly sales plan, for example. It doesn't work like that. It's not the philosophy here. It's much more abstract activity, and it should not be treated in the same way as, for example, operative plans for a certain division. We are targeting to sell those amounts of our product, for example. And this argument about not knowing what will happen in 5 years is often we call it GIGO argument, which serves in the organizations to shield from economic modeling, from forecasting, which is a complex and time-consuming activity. So it's like in some cases, from our experience, saying garbage in, garbage out is basically a way to evade the economic modeling, to basically try to avoid this activity. But again, I will emphasize this whole economic benefits modeling, which is the key concept for strategic portfolio decision making, is not about guessing the future. It's trying to understand what may happen in different scenarios. It's trying to understand uncertainty and trying to learn about what can happen, basically. It's not about guessing the future.
And how agility comes into play in the context of SPM and GIGO, especially knowing that, as you said in the beginning, you're very uncertain about some initiatives, especially of various particular types. How do you embrace agility in the context of SPM and GIGO?
I mean, agility is extremely important because the market conditions, all of the conditions which define our future, especially if you're looking 5 or 10 years into the future, they are changing all the time. So part of the philosophy here, part of the main principles is to be able to adapt to changes. So, and that also refers to planning and modeling. So all of your processes around that needs to be ready for changes, fast changes. So getting fast results, fast outputs based on ever-changing market conditions, for example. So agility is extremely important. So we are not creating one plan for our project, one economic viability analysis for our project, and then we are sticking to that. No, we need to be able to adapt to macroeconomic changes. We need to input them into the model so that we can analyze the changes in the situation almost in a real time, almost on a daily basis.
So SPM, in an essence, SPM shouldn't be a process or activity that happens, I don't know, like 2-3 times a year, or maybe in some organization only once a year when you do the review of your strategic portfolio. But whenever there is a need to sort of like update your assumptions, you should do it. Hence, also updating your forecast. Hence, sort of like minimizing the GIGO effect. Would that be about right?
I think you have the point here. So it's not about doing that 10 times a year or 15 times a year, maybe 4 times a year. It's more about being able to get on an event base, get the outputs fast. So if something on the market happens, you should be able to almost instantly see the results, how it impacts your long-term projects. This is the agility you have been talking about. Whether the frequency of your updates is set for 4 times a year, each quarter, for example, or half a year, this is not that relevant as the fact that your framework, your process needs to enable you to get the outputs fast. So whenever something happens on the market, you should be able to see almost instantly the impact on your strategic projects, and therefore make your updated or adjust your decisions basically.
Right, and before we jump to some essential takeaways in the context of Giga and how to avoid it, this is the next point of our agenda. I would still like to ask you about the fact that today's we live in a world when there are lots of different systems, lots of different places where you gather the data, and the systems sometimes they are very well connected. I mean, through well-defined APIs and system architectures. Sometimes it is not the case. So it is not that rarely that organizations tend to sort of like export data from one system into Excel, then they work on, they analyze and modify the Excel, then they import the Excel to another system. And how do you manage that? Or what is the what would be your answer on actually avoiding the Giga effect in the context of interconnected systems? Like, I know it's a tricky question, it's not that easy to answer, but just generally, what would be your advice here?
First of all, it's not that of a technical issue. So when it comes to data management, many organizations are very much focused on the technical aspects, how to integrate, how to connect, how to design the data flow. And of course, it's extremely important, but my guess is that it is slightly easier to connect the data between different systems from technical perspective, rather than to create a proper, let's say, logic for using this data. And I think that when it comes to forecasting, modeling the benefits, getting assumptions from different systems, from let's say, different perspectives, that the most important part is transparency and standardization, so that we know what we are using in certain cases, what kind of data, and we have it all defined and standardized. And usually this data is there somewhere to use as a foundation for our economic modeling, for example, and we don't have big technical obstacles to get it or to manage it, like, again, technically, but the problems are more related to the logic, how we use them. And sometimes you need to understand that simplification is extremely important, and it's something good. So making some even very simplified assumptions is sometimes the right way, if they are transparent and if they are clear to the stakeholders, to the users. And therefore, you create this kind of consistency across the board and standardization, which is extremely important in this process. And it helps you to avoid Giga, actually.
Right. So the right data architecture, as I hear you, is key. And also the less is more concept sometimes, meaning working on some aggregates as opposed to the detailed numbers is better. So these are this actually sort of is a great shift to hopefully a good few takeaways for you regarding the Giga effect. So let's now elaborate on those. Like, how do you actually avoid or minimize or even avoid the Giga effect, Jakub? What are the key takeaways for us?
I think it's more the whole thing is more of a philosophical approach. So first thing is that there is always uncertainty, and using the Giga argument is mostly about, hey, we don't know what will happen. Yes, there is uncertainty. You need to embrace it. You need to understand that it is there and it will always be there, and we cannot eliminate it. We need to embrace it, we need to understand it, and we need to decide whether we accept it or not for certain strategic initiatives or projects. Another thing is this whole benefits, because GIGO relates to economic modeling. I will emphasize it once again. So economic modeling, benefits modeling, however we call it, it's not an ad hoc activity, it's a process. And this is exactly what I was saying about standardization, consistency, and transparency. It's a process which, if it's well described, also with regard to data flow, data architecture, it's standardized, we can reduce GIGO because we know what kind of data we are using, in what way we are using this data. And therefore we can also accept potential scale of uncertainty, scale of unprecision, etc. So it should be a process which is standardized and consistent, and it helps a lot. Another thing is this model complexity. So I think we have discussed that a moment ago. So in many cases, less is more, and creating more complex models, adding additional assumptions, additional variables doesn't make it better, it makes it worse. So again, if you are about to choose between simplicity, transparency, and standardization against details and complexity, choose the first one, because you are thinking about the process, you are thinking about mass process, if you are thinking about dozens of projects, and even more next year, and even more next year. So basically, this is like, yeah, less is more basic, less is more here. Creating new additional assumptions adds additional risk factors to models. Modeling, again, it's not about guessing the future. It's not about creating direct accountability that I have planned that in year number 5, we will sell 10,000 units. And this is my sales plan. And now I'm accountable for that. It's not about that. In this future modeling, benefits modeling, we are trying to understand the economic profiles of our initiatives, what we can get, what is the scale of benefits, what is the scale of uncertainty, what is the scale of risks. And models are exactly about that. They help us to understand extremely complex reality, and they help us to manage it better. They're not about being precise, they're not about guessing the future. I'm repeating myself, but I think that this message is very important. And again, the quality of inputs, the whole thing which GIGO is about, can be significantly increased through transparency and collaboration. So if the process is transparent and you collaborate, you share, you discuss, you co-create, basically, you can extremely increase the quality of inputs, because this is, in many cases, this is the GIGO problem. We are not talking to each other. We are not gathering the knowledge from the organization. We are not able to use it, basically. So we are creating silos, and then, yeah, and then we have garbage. So this transparency and collaboration, this is extremely important, and it is very simple to implement, actually, or relatively simple. And of course, there are tools, there are specific tools to help us with this uncertainty, to help us to somehow measure it or understand it. We have been discussing those during last webinar when we talked about stress testing. This is exactly about that. This is also part of the solution here. And last but not least, best guessed forecast is always better than no forecast. So saying, because we are afraid of garbage in, garbage out, we are not doing models. This is a very false statement. Even if we have high uncertainty, even if our projects are very long-term and they are subject to very complex market environment, it is still better to create a model. It is still better to try to draw some conclusions and learn from it than to basically omit it. So best guessed forecast is always better than resigning from modeling.
And one more point that we touched upon when we were discussing the previous slide, the sort of like high complex IT sort of ecosystem of different systems should not be also an excuse to avoid like proper planning and forecasting, right? And then you can start working on some aggregates, even for some certain specific project or initiative types. And with well-designed process, you eventually get there. So I think, Jakub, thank you for the takeaways. We have 6 minutes left until 9. We have some questions from the users, so I'll just read them out loud and let's try to answer those. Regarding collaboration and sort of that can increase the quality of inputs, there is a question. Some people in some parts of our global organization might be very positive and some are more pessimistic. Can that be handled in a way to make assumptions from different teams easier to compare? Like where you have this.
This is exactly one of the key issues and problems, and the answer to that is standardization and comparability, which you may create by making this process more simplified, by using macro data assumptions, by using key drivers which are shared across the organization and they are managed centrally. Let's say this macro data layer in the SPM process is probably the big part of the answer here, so that you are using the same key drivers, key assumptions repository across the organization. It is, I mean, if you are using spreadsheet process, Excel process, it is very difficult. So it requires some additional tools. But basically this is the way you are addressing it, and this problem of let's say positive and more conservative people is extremely popular, I would say.
Right, thank you for that. The other question, Jakub, regarding the short and long-term projects. So some might be 1-3 years type of initiatives, other might be 10-20 years. I mean, longer time horizon here. How do you handle it? I mean, especially in the context of the longer projects, like what would be the answer? Would the sort of agility in the process and sort of like somewhat frequent updates whenever necessary be the key to manage those?
Again, of course, recognizing the uncertainty differences between short or mid-term projects and long-term projects is extremely important. So, there are techniques and ways to let's say take it into account. But if you are, it's like a more let's say extensive discussion on this particular topic. But basically, first thing is to do the stress testing, to create different scenarios, and maybe to weight the risk of the longer term projects with cost of capital. And they are, so if we're using proper KPIs for measuring the benefits over the life cycle, the long-term benefits will be of course reduced through time and value effects of cost of capital. So this is like the basic idea behind measures like NPV, for example. But of course, it's also a question about how you actually structure and build your portfolio, and the time or the timeline or the length of the projects might be one of the criteria or strategies to build your projects based on, let's say, short, mid, and long-term perspective, and to structure your portfolio and to balance between uncertainty and benefits.
All right, and the last question for the last minute and a half, maybe. Like some projects might not be sort of like that financially driven and might be yet of a strategic importance, like entrepreneurship, culture, attracting, retaining talents, and so on and so forth. How do you handle these kind of projects in a way of Giga? I mean, we sort of like, you've already touched upon that Giga is essentially a kind of pretty much related to financial economic modeling, but still, how would you answer that question?
Yes, of course, but it is definitely coming from financial modeling, but you may also relate that and refer that to those projects, let's say, without direct economic effects or which are not subject to economic benefits modeling. It all comes down to let's say, the transparency and the trust in decision criteria. So if you're using strategic impact analysis, for example, strategic importance analysis, then you are setting like a let's say set of different criteria. If they are communicated well, if they are understandable and transparent to the people who are subject to the assessment, you are basically reducing garbage in, garbage out. So it's about trust in the decision criteria, the way they are formulated, the way they are understood by the organization. So this is the way you may try to manage that in those types of projects.
All right, thank you. So there is a way also to assess and to minimize the Giga effect for sort of other types of initiatives that are of strategic importance, with maybe the strategic impact assessment and so on and so forth. I think this concludes today's session. So thank you very much for joining the webinar today morning. I hope you enjoyed that. We already invited for our next webinar next Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. CEST. We will talk about strengthening agility in the context of SPM. So hopefully that will be interesting as well. Hope you find the session insightful and interesting as usual. Thank you, Jakub, for all the insights and feedback provided. I wish you all have a great day and great start to the week. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, KJ. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.